I spend a fair bit of my year back in Australia working in about 10% of schools that are very, very challenging. By English standards, they're normally called schools in special measures or serious weaknesses. No, we don't use those awful terms in Australia, but they're the sort of schools I work with as a mentor teacher. So I'll team teach with a colleague in that classroom, trying to give them the kind of possibility of having a trusted colleague to see things that they literally see and feel and experience every day in those classes. Then over tea and coffee, we try to unpack what we've seen and heard and felt and experienced. And I work with a number of schools where my role is to train colleagues to be mentors, non-judgmental mentors, the complete opposite of Ofsted, the complete opposite, non-judgmental mentors for teachers who are struggling with very challenging groups of individuals, not just individually challenging kids, but challenging behaviour within group settings. So on this course, with Osiris, we're going to look at why classes may be described as more challenging, and that's often to do with issues outside our control, like social, emotional, financial, demographics and all those sorts of things. We won't get into all that background stuff, but with the reality of the classes we've got, how can we establish ourselves as a respectful leader with these kids in a collegially strong environment? What sort of skills do we need to develop to both focus and enable these students to feel safe with us in a learning environment, particularly when their behaviours are challenging, highly attentional or confronting? How can we address those behaviours so that all the kids who are in that classroom are not disenfranchised by the 4 or 5 or 8 kids who are the catalysts in the group? Because when you look at a group of challenging students, it's normally not 50%, it's about 30% at the most. Sadly though, if we don't establish well with the whole class, even the more responsible cooperative kids sometimes drift across and collude with the more attentionally demanding and confronting kids. So how can we, the first thing we'll look at is how can we establish ourselves as respectful leaders, confident leaders, with a new class where there's a lot of insecure attentional behaviour occurring, calling out, butting in, silly comments, smart aleck comments, jockeying for attentional position. How do we establish those critical first meetings where the kids can learn to trust us? Because there's no honeymoon period with challenging classes. No, it's on for young and old from the moment you meet the kids in the corridor. It's on for young and old. So we spend a fair bit of time looking at the establishment phase. Then we start to break down some of the skills at working with highly attentional, insecure and challenging, confronting students within group settings. Because behaviour is always different in groups than it is when you speak to the kid one-to-one privately. We'll also look at what kind of reasonable colleague support we could expect and ought to expect, particularly for younger teachers when they've got a known challenging group of students. What sort of colleague support can enable them to cope and manage? We're also going to look at how we can target and work with power brokers, kids who perhaps are the catalysts in the group. How can we, in the first month and a half or 2, work with those kids away from their classmates to try to develop some kind of personal behaviour agreement with these kids so that when they go back in the group, they won't have to display those highly attentional and confronting behaviours. And there are successful programs we've seen and looked at and researched that can help that small percentage of highly insecure but challenging kids, so they don't feel they have to parade their insecurities in the way that they do. But the course is intensely practical, and it's looking very much at skills and practices that enable us to work collegially to address the very challenging behaviours that many teachers in these more demanding schools have to face.